We are living in very interesting times. To some people, they find it very scary. To me, it's very interesting. People are beginning to ask some real, deep, heartfelt questions. Others are being challenged by these questions. I think it is very important to be challenged, especially the churches. When you are challenged, it makes you look within yourself and question your reality. And I like being challenged. I'm challenged all the time. These are some of the things I receive when I get challenged online. This guy makes me sick. His voice is so boring. He's a member of that cult. Why don't you go back to Africa where you come from? Why don't you just shut the bleep up? All you do is preach hate. Now these are some of the things I receive. Sometimes they're even more personal than that. I take their comments, get on my knees, and I pray for them all, then I continue. They don't realize that when they get personal, it actually makes my research go even deeper. But I'm realizing that a lot of people are being challenged and they don't know how to confront the challenges. You see, many churches are conditioned to think a certain way. Their minds are wired to think how the denomination tells them to think. And when challenges come their way, a lot of them do not know how to handle it. Over a number of years now, a lot of people have told me how they have family and friends who have left the church and are being wrapped up into Pan-Africanism, Egyptology, Nubianism, and they do not know how to handle these individuals. So in this study, I'm just going to give you a bit of an insight why exactly I'm doing a study called Black Consciousness versus Christ's Righteousness. Because many people are being confronted with questions and the churches do not know how to handle themselves. So in this study, I'm going to give you a bit of an insight into why I'm putting this study together. Because when you're challenged with real life issues, you need answers. When the gospel spread around the world, in a time when there was no wireless, no internet, no printing press, no cars, no planes or trains, these men who put their life on the line for this cause had a zeal and fearless mindset to restore fallen man back into the image of God. They all died a martyr's death but one, and could boldly say that they preached to every creature which is under heaven. But a counter-revolution was challenging the apostolic faith, and it is still ongoing till this very day.
These three spellings of hip-hop gives you the nature of hip-hop itself. Remember, hip-hop is first our collective way of thinking and being that has no form, has no shape. It's not even here in material reality. It's just the way we think, our collective consciousness. Most spiritual people never test their spiritual abilities. They live in a universal mind, but never ask the universe for anything.
This rapper, KRS-One, looks like he is empowering members of the black community. But his black consciousness is no different to what others are teaching in the white community. For when you strip the layers of their philosophy and get to the root, neo-paganism has no racial ties. Today's generation, the millennials, shun being called religious. But many are proud to call themselves spiritual, for they believe that they are at one with the universe and sadly worship and serve the creature more than the creator. Or to put it plainly in layman's terms, they give homage to creation, that is nature, and what is in the heavens, but they find it difficult to acknowledge and honor the Almighty God who spoke it all into place. Where did this postmodern thinking come from? The late Manly Palmer Hall said that the name Gnostic means wisdom or knowledge and is derived from the Greek gnosis. They interpreted the Christian mysteries according to pagan symbolism. A number of rings, amulets and gems were discovered dated to the early centuries AD with some very strange looking animals on them, many looking very serpent-like. They belonged to a sect that were a counter-revolution to the early apostles called the Gnostics, who believed that without divine aid, man comes to his full power and potential by developing certain facets of his mind where he must struggle to arrive at gnosis. The disciples gave strong warnings of this early humanistic trend, this science, or translated from the Greek gnosis, falsely so called. And even though modern critics have used their manuscripts to make an attack on Christianity, many of the early church fathers like the Neoplatonist Origen also used the Gnostic argument to denigrate the divine inspiration of the Holy Scriptures, and this led to the birth of the papacy, a religio-political humanistic system that puts confidence in mortal man instead of in God. It stood as an unquestionable authority for over a millennia, but the spiritual sway and strongholds it held over man was to crack, and an intense struggle between the Gnostics and the Apostles was going to start all over again. When I was in university studying media, there was something one of my lecturers said to me which gripped me. Modern social media has been made possible via the constant daily development of digital technology. Like many devices, it has its advantages as well as its disadvantages. It is a surveillance tool for the invisible government to keep an eye on each civilian within the global village. But instead of becoming reactionary and extreme to this information, I always encourage people to use these tools effectively to your advantage. I use these tools not to market myself, but to give God the glory, and to inspire people with hope when all looks dark. But where did social media come from? What I learned by studying media is now coming to light, that 5 centuries before Facebook and the Arab Spring, social media helped bring about the Reformation, according to the London Economist. It was the advent of the printing press that catapulted the Reformation, where Lorenz Coster, a native of Holland, started the development of this most essential art in the late 1400s that helped propel the development of science, religion, and morals. And Johann Gutenberg, a German blacksmith, goldsmith, and printer, who usually receives all the credit, introduced mechanical movable printing to Europe. It was an Englishman, John Wycliffe, in the 1300s who started the Reformation in Europe, and he told his followers to think for themselves. The following century, in the 1400s, Martyr John Huss in Czechoslovakia, influenced by John Wycliffe's writings via Jerome, helped spread the Reformation throughout Europe. But under Martin Luther, it expanded as a result of the first form of social media, the printing press, where he reintroduced people back to the Apostolic faith through a teaching called Justification by Faith, through a book that is on display in London's Victoria and Albert Museum, the Lutheran Bible. But Gnosticism was not eradicated altogether. It was to receive a new facelift by a Spanish nobleman, a soldier turned priest. Don Inigo Lopez de Recalde, who Latinized his name to Ignatius of Loyola, was arrested in Spain for being a member of a Spanish Gnostic sect called the Illuminati in 1527. He saw the spread of Lutheranism in Europe, and he was determined to defeat it at all costs by a counter-reformation. And he set up a group called the Society of Jesus, who the Protestants derogatively called the Jesuits, a name that stuck. And his mystical humanistic Gnostic ideas to counteract the Bible and the Reformation was preserved in a book called the Spiritual Exercises of Ignatius of Loyola. Throughout the next following centuries to this day, Apostolic Gnostic struggle was to intensify, and in order to understand the root of modern black consciousness, we have to study the trends. In the following century, in the 1600s, English church leader and Puritan Richard Baxter said, "The very design of the gospel is to abase us, and the work of grace is begun and carried on in humiliation. Humility is not an ornament of a Christian, but an essential part of the new creature. It is a contradiction in terms to be a Christian and not humble. We must study humility and preach humility and practice humility." What does a Jesuit theologian say in the 1600s? Anthony Escobar says, "It is lawful to make use of the science acquired through the assistance of the devil, provided the preservation and use of that knowledge do not depend upon the devil. For the knowledge is good in itself, and the sin by which it was acquired has been gone by. The following century, in the 1700s, the conflict of man-made humanistic Gnostic philosophy and dependence upon God's inspired word by faith continued. John Wesley was an ordained Anglican preacher who founded Methodism. His statue stands in the grounds of London's St. Paul's Cathedral, and he was a part of a religious revival called the Great Awakening, a call to apostolic purity, where he wrote commentaries on the Bible. But he was also practical. He was not only a preacher, but he was a kind of health reformer who helped the neglected, the needy, and the poor. And when slavery was profiting the profits of Western industry, John Wesley condemned it when most preachers endorsed it, and said another human being should not be treated so inhumane. But during the Great Awakening in France, you had the Age of Enlightenment, where humanist philosophy wanted to totally eradicate the Bible. One of its most famous advocates was French philosopher François-Marie Arouet, better known as Voltaire, whose bust is in London's Victoria and Albert Museum. This Jesuit-educated Freemason used reason, like the Gnostics, to eradicate the influence of the Bible. According to the New York Times, he was at war with both Judaism and Christianity. He wanted to purge all men of whatever persuasion from these superstitions in order to make them enlightened. And unlike Wesley, he was a polygenist who taught that black Africans descended from monkeys, an idea that still exists. What an achievement for the age of Enlightenment. In the following century, the struggle continues, and the 19th century conflict affects us to this very day. Archaeologists unearthed these artifacts in Iraq, ancient Assyria, and resurrected the lost city of Nineveh, Assyria's capital. The prophets Jonah and Nahum foretold of its fall, and this tablet in the British Museum verifies the fulfillment of their prophecy. The prolific writer James Aitken Wiley said, "Nineveh was besieged by the joint forces of the Medes and the Babylonians. Thus did Nineveh fall as the prophet foretold. The Bible is the word of God, and it is utterly useless in any man to cry out for more proofs or stronger arguments." Charles Darwin was a 19th century naturalist whose 1859 book, The Origin of Species, basically taught man that we are at one with nature, basically pantheism. Many Christians have argued that his private papers show that he retained his Christianity, but that is not the case at all. In a letter to a fan in 1880 that has been recently auctioned for $70,000 to $90,000, he said, "I am sorry to have to inform you that I do not believe in the Bible as a divine revelation, and therefore not in Jesus Christ as the Son of God. Yours faithfully, Charles Darwin." And this is the man whose works dominate modern science. In the following century, the 20th century, the apostolic Gnostic warfare intensifies, and for those who think it has no relevance to them, this conflict will be the final test. In the United States, Edward Alexander Sutherland said, "Again, the second great commandment, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, is the statement of a principle which underlies all history, civil government, and political and social science. If followed, it will solve all international difficulties as well as prevent personal animosity. It will blot out the evils of society, breaking down the barrier between poverty and riches. Trusts would never exist, trade unions would be unnecessary, and monopolies unknown if the one law of Jehovah were only learned." Continuing that principle of selfless love was George Washington Carver, a scientist, botanist, and inventor. He was a teacher of Henry A. Wallace, who later became U.S. Secretary of Agriculture and Vice President under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who also paid Carver a visit. And he was also highly respected by Henry Ford, who Carver helped to improve the stability of his Ford cars. But though he was that renowned, Carver knew whom he gave all his credit to. He said that we get closer to God as we get more intimately and understandingly acquainted with the things he has created. We can only understand the infinite as we lose the finite and take on the infinite. Living for others is really the Christ life after all the satisfaction, happiness and joy one gets out of it. What would happen if Christians were to take the counsel of these two men and become more humble and caring? Today's generation have almost unquestionable faith in secular science, and this includes some of the biggest names in showbiz. Billionaire Oprah Winfrey is a media proprietor, talk show host, actress, producer and philanthropist, known as the most influential woman in the world and the richest African American of the 20th century. With that level of influence, who has shaped her worldview? I purchased this magazine in May 2008, and Oprah Winfrey, in her own words, tells us who is her strongest influence. She said that spirituality isn't something I believe in. It is what and who I am, a spiritual being having a human experience, as the French philosopher and priest Pierre Teilhard de Chardin profoundly said. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was a 20th century Roman Catholic Jesuit priest, and as documented in the study Laws of Attraction, he is the most sought after author in New Age and occult circles. But he isn't the only influential Jesuit priest. Though mentioned in many even at the door studies, Georges Lemaitre is a man that if you ask anyone have you heard of him, they would say, who? He was a friend of scientist Albert Einstein, and his philosophy was endorsed by Pope Pius XII, so it received endorsement by the Vatican. It was originally called the primeval atom, but what did he introduce to the world? According to the official website of the American Museum of Natural History, the Big Bang Theory first appeared in scientific form in 1931 in a paper by Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian cosmologist and Catholic priest. The theory is accepted by nearly all astronomers today. According to the Catholic Herald that looks at the world from a Roman Catholic perspective, the Big Bang Theory was originally hypothesized in 1927 by Jesuit priest and physicist Georges Lemaitre. So Ignatius de Loyola's Men in Black, the Jesuits, the shock troops of Rome, still influence the thinking of the entire planet with the Big Bang, where it has influenced one of America's most famous astronomers, the late Carl Sagan.
Some part of our being knows this is where we came from. We long to return. And we can, because the cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff.
Though people put unquestionable faith in science, never quite asking where the Big Bang came from, it is music that is the most powerful medium in the world that can spread around the world and develop trends in seconds, much quicker than anything else can. And one of its most powerful genres is rap. The Wu-Tang Clan has been labeled as the greatest rap group of all time, whose music highly influenced the latter part of the 20th century. They are all members of the Eight-Pointed Star movement, the nations of gods and earths, the 5%ers, that teaches a Gnostic philosophy that black men are gods. And one of its members, Ghostface Killer, did a solo album, and the George Lemaitre Carl Sagan neo-Gnostic pagan philosophy continues with the Wu-Tang Clan.
Because everything in the universe, God, that's created the universe, God, exists within you. You see what I'm saying? And that's the mind that you can't see.
So you mean tell me I'm made of all this right here?
You the creator of all this.
Right.
Because all these things must happen. It must take place. See, people would go back in the day, God, and say, yeah, well, one man, one woman, Adam and Eve. It ain't no such thing. Everything you see always has been and always will what be.
So they believe there is no Adam and Eve. Why? Because the universe is within you. How influential is this group to this day?
The Wu-Tang symbol is the most powerful symbol in hip-hop. really of all time.
Everywhere I go to Russia, and I see females tatted with W's on their neck. It's like, it's like we bigger, even more overseas than what you is in the United States.
So from the Reformation to this day, the struggle between faith in God's word and trusting in your own heart continues. And the root of black consciousness is Gnosticism. When these manuscripts, a collection of 13 ancient books called codices, were discovered in Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt in 1945, it caused a sensation, and it showed the root of Gnostic philosophy. And this book, the Nag Hammadi Gnostic texts and the Bible, published in 1967, gives us a background of why people try to fight down Genesis. Many of the Gnostic beliefs still exist, such as the allegorization or mythologization of scripture to fit the doctrine of the Gnostics. So the Gnostics taught that the stories in the Bible were not true but just myths and allegory, where there is no creator God, no fall of man, and no need for a coming savior, no hope. And if you want to trace the roots to humanism, atheism, agnosticism, neo-paganism, theosophy, Darwinism, collective consciousness, etc., they can all be traced to Gnosticism. Their philosophy was manifested in a video that went viral a number of years ago titled Zeitgeist. At the opening of the trailer, it mentioned who drove its philosophy. A man by the name of Gerald Macy, who took the Gnostic argument and made it his philosophy. In his books, The Natural Genesis, works that are highly discredited by academics but embraced by the black conscious Pan-African culture, Gerald Macy said, "The Gnostics truly declare that all the supernatural transactions asserted in the Gospels were counterparts or representations of what took place above. That is, they affirm the history to be mythic, the celestial allegory made mundane." Gerald Macy's Gnostic ideas were to be continued by the late Dr. Joseph Ben Johanan. He spent time doing many lectures trying to refute the authenticity of Christianity, and he is revered by many in the black consciousness community as this intellectual don for the black cause, when all he did was borrow the same arguments from the Gnostics to prove his point. He is not original at all, just continuing the same pagan philosophy.
And there was no Adam and no Eve. Because Adam and Eve is a concept, an allegory that came from the Hebrews, otherwise called Jews.
So Gnosticism was the first official school of thought which attacked the authority of the Bible. And when you hear people saying today how the Bible is a myth, or it's an allegory, or it's not scientific, it's just an old argument being repackaged for our age. The school of higher criticism in the Enlightenment period was just really the Gnostic arguments. And when you see Pan-Africanism using the same arguments from the Gnostics, they just borrowed it from Europeans and repackaged it for the black community. I'm going to show you in this next segment a taste of what's to come in this next study. As I walk around London, England, the more de-Christianized the nation becomes, the more people are intrigued to delve into pre-Christian nature worship beliefs. And entertainment is skillfully opening that door by making the abnormal look normal and making the normal look abnormal. Many argue that just because they watch something, it does not mean it is going to affect them. Yes, it is true that different people have different responses to different things. But anything your eyes visualize or your ears hear, it feeds to the brain, and anything you feed into your mind is a form of education. The more something is fed to you, the more your mind becomes accustomed to it. And for quite a number of years now, young and old minds have had a constant diet of the occult, where the resistance to that which is evil is carefully being broken down. And from a prophetic perspective, the entire planet is being prepared for a final showdown in Revelation chapter 13, verses 12 and 13. The more even music videos are shot in a dark, eerie, surreal horror setting. This will also desensitize the mind and prepare it for anything.
Lucifer Morningstar. Is that a stage name?
God-given, I'm afraid.
What's your name?
Lucifer.
Like the devil.
Exactly.
That animism ceremony was for the Gotthard-based tunnel, a railway-based tunnel that runs through the Alps in Switzerland that opened at the beginning of June 2016, where they changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. It did look very eerie. But while many people are aware of the New Age pagan revival, very little is known of the pagan revival within the black community, where this goat-headed culture comes from. Many within the community weren't confronted for fear of being called a sellout. It was the black Cushite culture on the Nile who introduced this goat worship, and many black Egyptologists who try to defend it continue to say it is only symbolic. But this culture in Sudan, Egypt, wore around their necks a cross called an ankh, that many say is the Egyptian hieroglyphic that represents life, the most dominant insignia in ancient Egypt that was worn by nearly every god. It later became a symbol for the New Age in the 1960s, and now many prominent figures in the black conscious circles are using this symbol, which they believe represents their African identity. The ancient Egyptian kings called pharaohs were seen as an incarnation of Horus, the sun, and their crowns were adorned with the cobra. So they represented both the serpent and the sun. And the rap culture has been pushing interest into this ancient Egyptian culture, many calling themselves God, the great I am, and teaching a generation of youth the lie at Eden that they are gods.
Cause we got millions of cats that's coming up with that hustler spirit and drive. They got that Mitch in them, and they ain't gonna fall to the wayside. They gonna take their street smarts and run the world. Cause the black man is God, and no way out too. That's how I'm gonna leave it on you. Peace.
I am a God, even though I'm a man of God. My whole life in the hand of God. So y'all better quit playing with God.
Many of their black conscious fans will defend them by saying that they are only empowering blacks because they have been so downtrodden, for whites also teach a form of superiority.
And I love European culture and civilization. I consider it to be the greatest civilization this planet has ever produced. And we are all products, or most of us here are products of that civilization. And it is a fantastic thing.
Two wrongs do not make a right, and there is no such thing as a superior race. That is all just nonsense. The Bible does prophesy the rise and moral fall of many different world empires, and Egypt is one of them. And in the book of Revelation, Egypt alongside Sodom in the same verse are both used as models of rebellion against God. Today, many complain that black youth do not know enough about their own history. But when blacks who can't even read hieroglyphics get even a taste of it, they start to wage war against God and continue the rebellious trend of Nimrod. So let us first take a careful look at, from first a historical perspective, then second from a pagan idolatry perspective. To really understand history, you need a solid library in your house. The more you read, the more you expand your thinking. I came across two American historians. One was a man called Alonzo T. Jones. The other was an African American called Drusilla Dungy Houston. In their bibliography and footnotes of their works, they both quote an Oxford Don. His name is George Rawlinson. He was a 19th century English scholar, historian, and Christian theologian. He was the Camden Professor of Ancient History at the University of Oxford, and he was able to assess history intelligently. A primitive Babylonian kingdom is assigned to a people distinctly said to have been Cushite by blood. The Aryan, Turanian, and even the Semitic tribes appear to have been in the nomadic conditions when the Cushite settlers in Lower Babylonia betook to themselves to agriculture, erected temples, built cities, and established a strong and settled government. So Rawlinson confirmed that the Black Cushite culture set up the first kingdom on earth. This is confirmed by a few early Black 20th century intellectuals. On Battersea Park Road in southwest London once lived a British politician. His father was from Barbados and his mother was an Irish Liverpudlian. Though of mixed parentage, he leaned more to the black side, and this is what he said. "We come from an ancient race. We have a history to be proud of. Egypt borrowed her light from the venerable Negroes up the Nile. Greece went to school to the Egyptians, and Rome turned to Greece for law and science and warfare. England dug into Rome's centuries to establish a government and maintain it. Jeremiah the prophet asks, can the Ethiopian change his skin? We have, in addition to this testimony, the evidence of Herodotus, Homer, Josephus, Eusebius, Strabo, and others, and I am content to accept their evidence. Here is our ancient past. We have no need to be ashamed of it." Sir John Archer in 1918, almost 100 years ago, building on from Rawlinson's research, knew his history and was aware that Black Cushites made the first contributions to world civilization, a very overlooked and ignored epic of human history. But he was not the only one. On London's Harrow Road is a cemetery in Kensal Green in northwest London. It once housed the body in the lower crypt of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. His name is still on the registry books, the fourth from the top, and his number is 132.119, and his body was transferred to Jamaica in 1964, 24 years after it lay in the lower crypt. In 1923, Marcus Garvey echoes the words of John Archer in his lecture titled "Who and What is a Negro?" He said, "Thousands of Negro professors at that time taught in the universities and Alexandria, then the seat of learning, and that ancient Egypt gave to the world civilization, and that Greece and Rome have robbed Egypt of her arts and letters and taken all the credit for themselves. The power and sway we once held passed away. But now in the 20th century, we are about to see a return of it in the rebuilding of Africa. Yes, a new civilization, a new culture shall spring up from among our people, and the Nile shall once more flow through the land of science, art, and of literature, wherein will live black men of the highest learning and the highest accomplishments." J. Edgar Hoover and the economic powers in the West would never let Garvey's dream come to pass. Africa has too much natural resources. But the root of black consciousness arguments can be traced to Marcus Garvey. Both Egypt and Babylon, founded by Cushites, are highly condemned for their pagan idolatry in the Bible. And in the West, their culture is being revived. In the new Harry Potter franchise, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, at the Magical Congress of the United States, a female stands in a goat-headed pentagram, an occult insignia. And the late David Bowie promotes in his video, Black Star, the pentagram. But if you read the many blogs of the black conscious community, they were always using the same arguments as Marcus Garvey, that Europeans have stolen their culture, and every time a high-profile representation of Egypt is presented to the world, it is always Europeans who are being depicted. Now personally, I don't want any part of pagan idolatry. Blacks were the first, I recognize it, but I have moved on. I am not going back to goat worship, phallic worship, or ancestor worship, or a cat wearing a dress. But here are the black conscious arguments. The ancient Egyptians used to worship every unclean and hateful bird, with its distinct two talons at the bottom. This has now become one of the symbols of the seal of the United States, and yet they have said Europeans have stolen it from them. The Great Pyramid with its unfinished capstone in Egypt is definitely a great wonder of the ancient world, 2,300,000 bricks, and this has also become an insignia for the seal of the United States. The all-seeing eye that is also prevalent throughout the ancient world, especially Egypt, has also been incorporated into Freemasonry. The ancient Egyptians revered Osiris, but they also gave homage to his backbone called the Jed. Today we would call it Catholic relic worship, but it was highly praised by the Egyptians. The Egyptian god Ptah, god of creation, the arts, fertility, craftsmen and architects, holds in his hand Osiris's Jed. It kind of looks like a magic wand, and today actors are awarded with the Egyptian god Ptah at the Oscars. And this is the black community's deep bone of contention. But I would like to get to one of the main issues of why I am putting this study together. Today's generation are looking for answers. They are plowing through libraries and they are going onto the internet searching for clarity and truth. Many young people are being challenged about their faith, and when they come to the church for answers, if the questions posed will challenge them, they either ignore it or brush them to the side, or the usual cop-out, oh, just pray on it. When you do that, they will look elsewhere for truth. And God himself says in Exodus chapter 12, verses 26 and 27, and Joshua chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, that any time your young people come to you with questions, you give them answers. It is a divine command. But let me share with you some of the challenges first posed by the white community, then borrowed, or you could say stolen, by the black community. This rapper, Busta Rhymes, a 5%er, has on his t-shirt the Catholic mother and child image. In the British Museum, you can see the ancient Egyptian Isis and Horus mother and child image. Jesus has been compared to Horus, a falcon. But here's where Christians really get challenged. The Egyptians had a triune worship of Isis, Horus and Osiris, and the black conscious argument, borrowed from whites, say that Godhead, sometimes people call the Trinity, was borrowed from Egypt. They also say the Christian cross is Egyptian, and we shall deal with every one of these arguments in this up and coming study. When I first started this project, I was originally just going to do just one video, but as I began to do more and more research, it now has to be in 3 parts because of the nature and content of the work. So I'm going to go back into the lab, and you probably won't see a video for a while because I'll be still doing some more research and some more editing. If something does come up on current affairs, you may probably see a video. But in the meantime, just please stay tuned.